All right, we're just going to wait a few moments as we admit people into the room. Just a few moments, we'll be started shortly. If you're just joining us, we're waiting. We still have a lot of people coming in right now, so we're waiting till we get a good group admitted and we'll kick right off.
Someone see the chat that Gabriel says she can't hear anything?
Okay, so we'll see. Alice, can you respond? Gabrielle?
All right, and again, we're just waiting. We're admitting people every second right now, so we want to wait till we get almost everyone in, and we will get started.
You are not muted.
Okay, I'm just going to start. We will continue to admit people throughout the session, but we want to make sure we are mindful of everyone's time tonight. My name is Amelia Lochner-Malave. I am a staff member at the New York State chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We're grateful for everyone who's coming to attend. This will be recorded and available to everyone after this presentation and for anyone who did not attend. I'm joined by 3 other wonderful people who have helped to develop this. One of those people is Notion Hawk, who was our BSW representative and is now our MSW representative. She's back to do a lot more work with us, and we're so grateful to have her. She helped form the idea for this, and we're really thankful for it. The next person I have with me is Evelyn Williams, who's the policy coordinator at the New York State chapter. She's a facilitator, also a facilitator of this program tonight. And I think, I mean, everyone in the chapter I can say we can speak for is grateful for Evelyn's leadership and Evelyn's presence in the organization and in our lives in general. And I want to thank her for being here tonight. Lastly, I also have Samantha Fletcher with us, who is the New York State Chapter Executive Director and is going to also be a facilitator with us tonight. We are really happy that she has decided to support the ideas of our membership. I'm grateful that she knows that her biggest strength in growing this chapter is by providing resources and support to the social workers that we serve. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'm just going to go over the administrative items and then hand it off to our facilitators for the evening. To explain Zoom a bit for those who have not used it before, you have the option to show your camera or not show your camera on your down bar. We ask that you mute yourselves if you are not speaking. There will be opportunity for us to speak during this town hall tonight. You also have the option to use your reactions. You can give a thumbs up or you can clap at the bottom of your page. You have the option to use chat and either message everyone. You can chat to the entirety of everyone who's on the call right now, or you can private message individuals or the facilitators of this presentation. Our next session will take place on August 27th. We will follow this up with more information and registration for that as well. And I also want to note that this is not a program that holds CE credits. So while we do many programs that do hold CEs, while this isn't a webinar format, this is not a CE program. If you need some CE programs, please contact us and we'll get you to the right space for that. If you have any questions about how to use Zoom, please message us. We have a great staff here to support you throughout this event. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Please be mindful throughout the event tonight that we want to center voices of Black, Indigenous, and social workers of color. We ask that you be mindful of that while we're doing the presentation and while we're doing the question and answer section. Without taking up any more of our time, I'm going to hand it over to our three facilitators.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Notion. Thank you, Amelia, for that wonderful introduction. I hope you guys are all doing well. I see a lot of familiar and new faces, which is so great. And welcome to our first town hall. So I always believe that in order to find the dedication and passion to really make a long-lasting change, we need to understand how we got here. The idea of a town hall centering Black, Indigenous, and Brown social worker voices and our overall fight to eliminate white supremacy in social work isn't a novel idea. Social workers have been fighting to address these issues for years. The history has shown that every movement starts with a defining moment. And a few weeks ago, the National NASW chapter blocked a Black social worker, Kim Young, from their social media account. The reason, as Kim stated, for why she was blocked is completely irrelevant. What we here at the New York State chapter believe in is that, with the exception of abusive and derogatory language, there's no justification for silencing social workers. And this issue has been resolved, and I do want to acknowledge the effort and the cooperation that the national office and the social media team has shown to ensure this doesn't happen again. But it led me to think, how can we improve our profession? We learn in school that social work is a transformative process. It's what I've learned throughout my BSW and MSW education. And in order for our profession to be better and for us to be better and actively help our communities and clients, we need to look back and address our own flaws in our very profession. What this instance showed me is that there is a gap, and a huge gap, in Black and Brown social worker voices. That's why we're here today, to make sure our chapter is actively centering these voices and letting us lead the change that our profession needs. Our voices are here to stay, and we are going to pave the path for change. And for that, I want to thank you all so much for coming today, and I really look forward to working with everyone and making that change that our profession needs. And as Amelia said before, I am the MSW representative. I'm also the chair of the comm committee. So if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out, please feel free to do so at any time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Notion. I really appreciate you setting this up for us and working with us on how this is going to work and how we're going to initiate this plan. So I want to talk a little bit about that. First, I'll tell you who I am. Amelia always says, tell people who you are. My name is Sam Fletcher, and I'm the executive director of the New York State chapter of NASW. I have been with the chapter for 11 months yesterday. So I'm rounding up on a year here, and I want to acknowledge a couple of things. I want to say that we have really worked hard to rebuild our staff and to be more responsive to our members and social workers across the state. And that's extremely important to us at the chapter level. And anytime you feel that we're not doing that, I want to know about it. We all do, because we want to improve in every way we can. I also just want to touch on this initiative and what it's going to look like across time. So when Notion and Amelia and I initially met about this, and then we took it to Evelyn, because we take everything to Evelyn to get her opinions and to find out what her thoughts are. What we are really looking at was, how can we change the profession of social work? Because we recognize the systemic and structural racism in our society, and the one thing we can control is our own profession. And so we're looking at, like, how can we do this? What would this look like? And so we developed this series of town halls. So tonight is really a time for healing and to acknowledge the racism that has existed in our profession and the racism that still exists in our profession. And then we're going to move on to working town halls. So the next town hall, Amelia already let you know, it's August 27th at 6. This town hall is going to be co-facilitated by Cecily Mitchell Harper. Cecily, can you just say hi so people see your face?
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. Good evening, all. Yes, I'm Cecily Mitchell-Harper. I'm excited to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to the August 27th session. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecily, and also by Alexandra St. Laurent. Alex, can you unmute and say hi so people can see your face as well?
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. I'm also very excited for the next town hall. So I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. So I'm very appreciative of Alex and Cecily stepping forward and offering to co-facilitate, and we've been meeting with them as well. And what we found is that it's going to take a series of town halls to really set our goals. We're looking to set our goals. If we had an equitable profession, what would that look like? So our first town hall on the 27th is going to focus on our chapter of NASW. What would an equitable chapter look like? And we're going to look to set those goals. Once we've set goals in several areas, including the New York State chapter of NASW, social work education, and social work practice, then we're going to break up into work groups and have the work groups set the action steps to make those goals a reality. And we're going to have deliverables that we'll be able to hand to schools of social welfare, to organizations, that are really actionable steps they can take to create equity within the profession. So this is our long-term goal. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And I want to also say that this initiative will be led by Black and Brown social workers. So every co-facilitated town hall will be led by Black and Brown social workers, and every work group will be led by Black and Brown social workers. And we've had a lot of white social workers reach out to us and say, how can we be allies? What can we do? We see these problems and we want to help. This is a perfect initiative for you to step in to your allyship. You can work in these work groups and you can help do the work and create those steps that we're going to have, that we can create this equitable profession. So I want to acknowledge too that I recognize that some people may have had a negative interaction at NASW, the New York State chapter. And when I say negative, I mean racism, that something racist may have happened to you in the history of our chapter. And if this has happened, I want to hear from you, because we are dedicated to changing this chapter. We want to know what has happened, you know, how that made you feel and how we can change and how we can work differently. So we're going to be solely focusing on that the 27th, but before then, reach out to us. Amelia will put contact information in the chat box so you'll know how to get a hold of us, but we're committed to doing this. It's a new day in social work and we'll lead the way. And so the purpose of tonight, we want to recognize the racism within the profession. So the small part that I'm going to talk about in this has to do with the history of social work. And the reason I'm focusing on this is because my research focused on social activism and social work. And I did a 5-year study on this, a really long in-depth qualitative study. While I was preparing for this study, I did an in-depth review of social work history. And as part of that review, everything I'm reading was about Jane Addams and Mary Richmond at the beginning of our profession, that these are the mothers of social work. And I was really struck by that, because what I was looking at were times when social workers were on the forefront of social activism. And I found that there were 3 specific times. One of them is what we call the progressive era. And that was between the 1890s and 1914, at the very beginning of the profession. And almost everything I'm finding talks about the work of Jane Addams and other white social workers who ran settlement houses. So I did a little digging, because I wasn't satisfied with that. And in that digging, I found 3 Black social workers who I never heard about in my social work education that we should definitely be learning about. And I really wish I would have learned about, because the work they contributed is just as important as Jane Addams, and they helped to build the profession too, and we never learned about them. So I just want to talk very briefly about these 3 social workers who helped build our profession. The first is Dr. George Hayes. Dr. George Hayes was the first Black person to graduate with a doctorate degree from Columbia University. Now, of course, he graduated with a degree in sociology because social work wasn't a profession. There wasn't education for it at the time he graduated. And but all the work he did was social work. So in 1910, he co-founded the National Urban League, which still exists today. This organization has helped over 20 million people of color. It supports Black communities, and he was a co-founder of that. He also essentially started the School of Social Work at Columbia University, and he put in place systematic ways to educate Black social workers and for Black social workers to go out and help the community and engage in social work. I never learned about him. I hope you learned about him. If you didn't, we need to talk about him. He needs to be in our social work education. He needs to be in our circles. The next person I want to talk about is Ida B. Wells Barnett. I had heard her mentioned in social work, but I didn't know what she did. And I didn't hear about her in the same way as I heard about Jane Addams. Ida B. Wells, she lived between 1862 and 1931. She was instrumental in starting the NAACP, and she started writing against lynchings in the late 1800s. So she was writing publications against lynchings of Black people and also about the poor education system for Black children. So she was an advocate in the late 1800s until her death. She also became the first president of the Negro Fellowship League in 1910. And this organization worked with Black people who were coming from the South and relocating to the North at the turn of the century. And she also likely founded what was the first Black woman suffrage group in 1913. It was called Chicago's Alpha Suffrage Club. I'm just touching on a few things that she did and also a few things that Dr. Hayes did. But again, these were people who were very clearly doing social work, who are remembered as social workers, and we don't learn about them. And then the last person that I want to just mention is Lugina Burns Hope. She lived from 1871 to 1947. She identified as a social worker. She spent most of her career in Atlanta, and she worked for the improvement of Black communities through traditional social work practices. One of the things she's most recognized for is her leadership in the neighborhood union. This became the groundwork for the grassroots component of the civil rights movement. So she created some of the activism ways in which the civil rights operated from. And again, I had never heard about her until I dug a little deeper and did more research. And there's two other periods of activism within the profession where, again, we don't hear about Black and brown social workers. I don't want to go into those because what I really need to do and want to do right now is hand this over to Evelyn Williams so she can talk a little bit more about racism, the history of racism in the profession, and then she's going to start us out on our conversation as a whole and how we're going to talk about what's currently happening. So Evelyn, over to you.
Thanks, Samantha. And thanks so much for your leadership in sponsoring this and encouraging us to pursue this. I'm reflecting on what I wanted to focus on this evening before we start talking as a group. I thought about it, and you know what we don't talk perhaps as much on, we talk about oppression, we talk about racism, you know, we talk about what's been happening to us as a people since we came here in 1619. And I was thinking about it in the context of what we have been able to do as, you know, and I'll focus on Black people because, you know, we were the ones that came here in 1619, what we had been able to do and survive up until this point. And I think we need to acknowledge that. If you have an opportunity to go to the National Museum of African History and Culture, I don't know if I have all the words right, one of the things that they do in the exhibits that are on the 3 levels below the street level is that of every level of the period of time that level is focusing on, they show the number of Black people who were living during that time, you know, the population. And what was interesting, notwithstanding the type of history that we have been in and what we've had to experience as a people, our population kept growing. And so that's important, because when you think about, you know, and sometimes I know I just can't read anymore about some of the things that happen because, you know, you just go, oh, it's too intense. But if you think about what we've heard about how people lived during slavery, what they had to endure, and then coming out of that, thinking that they were now free and finding themselves back in another system of slavery, taking us all the way into the mid-50s before some other activities started, you wonder, how were we able to continue to live, to continue to have children, to continue to somehow raise children in the kinds of variables that were all around us? And I think it's important for us to not let go of this, because what it tells us is the amazing strength that we had. We had to be strong. For us to be where we are now in terms of the total number of Black people who live in the United States, given the history since 1619, we have had amazing strength. And the other aspect is that maybe, yes, we're not identified in the Eurocentric narrative of historical experiences in the various professions, and it almost seems as if we were not doing anything. We were just sort of there trying to, you know, maybe eat a little bit and, you know, get around white people, whatever, almost as if the building of our communities, the building of systems, we were not engaging at all. That the only way we were involved is when, you know, white people set up their systems, and somehow we would be the fortunate ones to get a little trickle of whatever services or jobs, et cetera, that they had, that we were totally dependent on white society. And that is not true. It's important to believe, it's important to know that. I would encourage some of you scholars or soon to be scholars to do the scholarship, to bring to fore a deeper level of our history that has not been presented, whereby it is very clear that in the Black communities, there was a social welfare system going on. It was not articulated in the same way that you learn about social services today, or going back even into the 40s or the New Deal, but Black people took care of each other. And one of the mainstays during slavery, where we see the operation of social welfare, is the church, because the church was the one legitimate place where slaves could come together as slaves and not have to have complete oversight by master. And so that became the hub by which not only was it a day where people just could completely let go of their brutal experiences and find respite in communicating with other like beings and find something positive within the spectrum of life that would give them the ability to keep going. Because see, that's the key. Somehow we kept going. Through all of it, we kept going. Nikki Giovanni did this presentation a few decades ago at Empire State College, where she goes through this very interesting narrative about what it was like to find oneself, you know, at the ocean in the slave castles, you know, what they call them, the castles, I think, where then, you know, you got on the ship to go to the New World. And she takes us through this whole story about how that whole experience might have been. And she talks about that when the slaves, you know, think about it now, many of the slaves came from Central Africa and were brought to the coast. So for them, they had never seen an ocean. And so now here you are looking at all this water, and remember, we use the word ocean because, you know, we've been raised in a language that now ocean is defined to us and we know what it means. But you think about Africans at that point in time, when they saw all that water, they had no conceptual framework around what that was. And so she talks about how you had these slaves who were put on these ships, and also you had different tribes who were all together. And because they all spoke different languages, they could not communicate with each other. So just imagine this mentally. It's like now somebody took a group of us and put us in a spaceship and started to go up somewhere in space. And so during that time, she says it was as long as the Africans could see the seagulls, which was an indicator of land, that at least there was some measurement of hope or a sense of having control over some aspect of one's life, even if it was only mentally. But then she said on the 10th day, when there were no longer any seagulls and all you had was this vast expanse of ocean. Now just think of this, a vast expanse of ocean you've never seen, you don't know anything about what this is, it just to you is water. You have no concept of land in the sense of this new land. And at that point, she said, Africans had to make a choice. She said, and there were some Africans who could not deal with the aspect of being in the unknown. And so they jumped ship when they could. She said, but there were other Africans, for whatever reason, stayed on the ship, you know, did what they needed to do to survive. And she said, and those were the Africans who then landed on this new world. And what she said to us is, she said, those are the shoulders that you are standing on now. And so what she was saying to us is that the amazing strength that we have had and continue to have is something that we need not lose sight of at all. And so when we look at social welfare, we don't want to buy into the ethnocentric script that all of these systems that we're familiar with and talk about are based in, you know, the intellectual capacities and organizational capacities of white people that somehow we just sort of fell into after they decided to let us into their systems. We were doing social welfare on the plantation. It wasn't language as social welfare. We took care of each other. We made sure that so-and-so who couldn't eat, then, you know, we would divide food for them. We would eat some and they would get some too. So this concept of helping has been very indigenous to not only Black people, brown people too, because if it was not there, we would not be here today, at least not in the numbers that we are. We have always been helping one another in certain levels. I can remember when I would be I would be down with my grandmother in Aiken, South Carolina, and we would be sitting on the porch at night, you know, just, you know, and neighbors come by, you know, it's a lot of just community chatter. And all of a sudden, you know, one of the neighbors would come and she would have this big pot. I don't even see them anymore. It's like a 10-gallon pot. And that was normal in the South. You know, people cooked a lot of food. And she would come up on the porch. She had this huge pot. And my grandmother's name was Emma. And she would say, Emma, she said, I bought you some collard greens. She said, you know, I just clipped my collard greens and I had some extra collard greens. And so here they, and I would look at this big pot and I said, well, how much did you cook? You know, that's a lot of collard greens. And that's how they were. I can remember going to the church. We would be in the church and the pastor would say, Sister so-and-so is going to the hospital on Monday and she's going to be in the hospital for a week. So we need some people now to volunteer because, you know, the kids got to go to school. They need breakfast, they need lunch, they need dinner. You know, the husband's going to work. We need somebody with the house. And you would have the church. We didn't need the church, the members in the church would set up an entire system whereby on Monday, Sister so-and-so and Brother so-and-so would be at the house. They would make sure the kids got to school. They would, you know, clean, people would be there to clean. They would cook dinner so that when the father came home, him and the kids had something to eat. And they had a system of who was going to visit the sister in the hospital every day, and that and they were going to make sure that, because they didn't like that hospital food, so it made sure that the sister had her breakfast, her lunch, and her dinner every single day. And this had nothing to do with money. It was about community. It was about ensuring that we are a community and we need to help each other. We need to look out for each other. And if we do that, we will be strong as a community. That is our heritage. I mean, what I experienced in the South was not new. This goes all the way back decades, because my grandmother would say, your great-great-grandmother, ba, 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 ba. So we don't see that in the books about how we have been as a community. And, you know, unfortunately, and there actually are scholars writing about, you know, integration and, you know, the pluses and minuses of that, because in some places you saw the breakdown of some of the internal social services that were at play that were just part of being members of a community. There was social, and I can remember this, there were times where if so-and-so needed money or needed clothes, the church was one of the key places. It was not just a place for worship, it was a place whereby a lot of different types of services could coalesce and you could get things out to people, because that's where the majority of people came, was the church. Because that was the one of the, and this goes back to slavery, that was the one place where generally white people didn't interfere. So you could do your thing. And you could be with the folk in real time. You know, you didn't have to watch it, you know, you didn't have to speak the King's English. You know, we could dress the way we wanted to dress. We could shout the way we wanted to shout, you know, we could talk jive the way we wanted to talk jive, and we didn't have to apologize to anyone. We didn't have to explain who we were or why we were doing what we were doing. We were just being. It was being. So this is part of social welfare. That we have a historical lineage whereby we have been able to help one another, provide for one another, and also advocate. So you have people who've been advocating for our communities since right after slavery, and even before, while slavery was going on. You had Black people who were advocating for the need for resources. You know, you also had Black people who were linking with white philanthropists who were supportive of, quote, the Negro cause, whereby Black people would actually go and what would be the word? I won't say politic, but they would advocate and do what they needed to do to get a white philanthropist to come to the South or to come to a place in the North and put their money into a building so that they could have a school, or a building where they could have some health services. Also, in some places in the South, one of the things that, by the way, the idea, and I'm trying to remember, because this is, you know, I'm calling up history that's been a while since I've dealt with this. But anyway, there's a story about this one place in the South whereby at the time, the practice used to be that children, if they were orphaned, they were placed in prison with usually men, primarily men, but sometimes women, but more so men. And the issue was, you know, you have these children, I mean, you know, 8, 9, whatever, in prison with grown men. And so it was felt that that was not healthy for children. The children could have been at risk for certain things. So there was this Black woman who started the concept of orphanage, whereby she found this, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think there was a white patron, and there was this house or something, and, you know, she was able to, for the white patron, to sponsor this house. And so she became the person to get the children out of prison and put them in a safe location whereby they could be taken care of, as well as they could get the necessary schooling that, you know, which was a very strong aspect of, you know, they call them Negroes, I'll use the word Negroes then, in terms of feeling that if they could educate men, women, and children, that was the vehicle for not only survival, but for advancement, both economically and socially. So of course you don't hear that. You don't hear that. But you know, this is the kind of thing that Black people were doing that definitely after the Civil War, where Black people were totally abandoned. I mean, imagine, just abandoned. They were starving on the streets. They had no clothes, etc. And so the way they were able to survive was coming together and beginning to work with each other, supporting each other in a way that, you know, they could then, you know, survive and begin to make progress. In the book that's called Black Heritage and Social Welfare, 1860 to 1930 by Edith Ross, she says, the most significant efforts of Blacks in the field of social welfare were not made until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution were ratified. These are the policy enactments which changed the legal status of Blacks in the United States. However, the participation of Blacks in social welfare enterprise both antedates and postdates our self-imposed period of reexamination. Okay, I want to, and is it in this? I have a few books here. Hold on a minute. So for instance, in 1894, there was an organization called the Colored Protective Association. And it says, in this thrifty rushing 19th century, when invention and enterprise are lending much in aiding the human family in rising to the high mark of that civilization, which characterizes all thoroughgoing industrious people, the Negro has not shown in the least that he is wanting on any of these lines. He has organized banking systems, building and loan associations, institutions of learning, and corporations of such a nature as to aid the people in acquiring wealth in many ways which enable them to have some income outside of their daily labor. The Colored Men's Protective Association is one of those enterprises which render many a poor man, washerwoman, and mechanic's condition in time of sickness or disability less burdensome than it otherwise would have been without the existence of such an enterprise. So that's one example. Okay. Then you have what's called this is about what was going on in the rural South. And this is by Rosa Cooley. And it says okay, I want the right year here. Okay, I'll have to look. It doesn't have the year, but this is still in like the 1800s. Okay. So she's talking about what's happening in rural South. And she says, what is being done in Henrico County, Virginia, can be done in every county of the South. And at no far distant day, we shall see a change in our present inadequate country schools. A young Negro woman has been appointed under the auspices of the Jeans Rural School Fund as supervisor of the Negro schools of Henrico County. In each of the schools, she has organized school leagues, introduced industrial work, and helped the school teacher. 23 schools are thus brought into a closer organization. School terms are lengthened and the buildings kept in good repair, as well as being made more attractive. So that was, education and the development of schools was very prominent during that time. Then another document that's called The Basis of Race Adjustment. And this was written in 1913. And it says, the Negro's relation to the white people of America permanent progress can be made only by the increase of justice, an equal chance for the Negro to get work, to hold work, to develop his capacity for work, equal protection of life and property, equal opportunity to educate his children to the limit of their varied capacity, and to provide such a home for his family as his taste dictates and his purse allows, equal opportunity in sharing political responsibilities and of responding to the duties of citizenship, conditioned by character only, are fundamental conditions without which permanent adjustment cannot be made. Does that sound familiar? Then talking about economic progress during the same period of 1913. Listen to this. The Negro was freed as penniless, landless, naked, ignorant labor. And that's how Negroes were once the Civil War ended. Very few Negroes owned property in the South. A large number owned property in the North, but 90% of the race in the South were field hands, servants of the lowest class. Today, 50% are farm laborers and servants, and over half of these are working as efficient modern workmen under wage contract. Above these, to use the figures of 1900, there are 750,000 farmers, 70,000 teamsters, 55,000 railway hands, 36,000 miners, 33,000 sawmill employees, 28,000 porters, 21,000 teachers, 21,000 carpenters, 20,000 barbers, 20,000 nurses, 15,000 clergymen, 14,000 masons, 13,000 dressmakers and seamstresses, 10,000 engineers and firemen, 2,500 physicians, and above all, 200,000 mistresses of independent homes, and 2 million children in school. This is 1913. Okay. Okay, I'm looking for this, a really great chart about, where is it? Oh, shoot. Okay. Social work among Negroes. This was written in 1928. And it says it's a plan. The modern idea of social work among Negroes is less than 20 years old. The first Negro to set forth in a comprehensive manner an organized social work plan was George E. Haynes, who in 1910 appeared before the Committee on the Improvement of Industrial Conditions of Negroes in New York, an organization founded in 1906. Okay, so then it says there's a plan that was presented, and the plan includes, it was organized in the home of Mrs. William H. Baldwin Jr., and it was organized for the following purposes: to bring about coordination and cooperation among existing agencies and organizations for improving the industrial, economic, and social conditions of Negroes, and to develop other agencies and organizations where necessary, to secure and train Negro social workers, to make studies of the industrial, economic, and social conditions among Negroes, to promote, encourage, assist, and engage in any and all kinds of work for improving the industrial, economic, and social conditions among Negroes. So there was a lot going on in our communities. And one of the things, if any of you have taken a research course as part of your graduate, your studies, I would be surprised if they have included in the curriculum the Philadelphia Negro, which is considered one of the best research undertakings still to this day that was done by E.B. Du Bois, whereby he actually used scientific methods to study the Negro condition in Philadelphia and published a comprehensive research undertaking on the outcomes of that study. And the methodology that he used, I think it's like early 1900s, because it was published in the 1900s. I think he started late 1800s. That study is the methodology, is a methodology that's still employed today. But yet, we don't hear about that. So this book is the Black Heritage and Social Welfare. The next one that just want to point on is called Black Empowerment, and it's Social Work in Oppressed Communities by Barbara Bryant Solomon. And this book was published in 1976. And we did a lot of reading, read her book. So she says in the Helping Professions chapter, The Foundations of Empowerment,
these niches
she says, social work as a profession changed dramatically in regard to its theoretical base for practice immediately following World War I. As a result of exposure to psychiatry and the new Freudian psychology in Army neuropsychiatric hospitals during the war, social workers began to look more and more for psychological causes in the etiology of personal and social dysfunction. This new emphasis led to the diminished concern with social, situational, or interpersonal factors in problem solving, and a greater concern with intrapsychic processes and the development of insight. Unfortunately for Blacks, this new emphasis held little more promise to help with their problems than had the former one. In fact, the profession was experiencing a new clientele, the voluntary client from the most affluent middle class, whose problems were not economic, but expressed in a new terminology of mental hygiene movement. The social worker who embraced the Freudian model was no longer a provider of concrete services, but a catalytic agent who helped marshal the individual's intrapsychic processes to increase insight and thereby increase capacity for problem solving. Again, Blacks were rarely perceived as amenable to treatment, since most instances the problems of survival transcended all others, and the social work profession was ill-equipped to handle so massive a need. Then later, let's see here. Okay, no. So that's with, Barbara and her work. I'm just going through a few just to let you know, see that there were books that were written, have been written for some time. And for some of the work that we do, I think it's important to read about what Black people were writing about social work, not just currently, but to go back and to read what people were writing about in the 1900s, early 1900s, and read authors who are talking about social work and the Black, the African-American situation in the 20s, so that we can begin to get a historical understanding of how the relationship that Black people have had with social work, those who were professionals, and then those who were receiving the services of social work professionals. And one of the difficulties that happened, and I think I'll have it in this other book, one of the things that happened, and this, you saw definitely a schism in the 1940s, and it started becoming more pronounced definitely as the 60s came in, whereby it was this belief system, particularly the writers of the 60s and 70s, the Black writers, they were talking about how social work or social services was more about getting people to conform to the ethnocentric paradigm of what it is, how one should live a life, and conform to the various ways of being, quote, a good American. I want to just read you something in the text that I often use in the macro practice course. It's by Promoting Community Change by Holman. And I like the way he writes it, because in the first chapter, this is on the second page of his textbook, he says that, well, he says this. He says, they come to the people of the slums not to help them rebel and fight their way out of the muck. Most social work does not even reach the submerged masses. Social work is largely a middle-class activity and guided by a middle-class psychology. In the rare instances where it reaches the slum dwellers, it seeks to get them adjusted to their environment so they will live in hell and like it. A higher form of social treason would be difficult to conceive. And then he goes, strong words, aren't they? How do they apply to the way you provide human services? So, that's just one more, and I had this wonderful chart that I can't seem to find now about our history. So in the next book, the last one I'll use is Social Work in the Black Experience. And this is by Elmer Martin and Joanne Martin. And by the way, this book is actually published by the National Association of Social Workers, which is interesting. And it was published in 1995. And I doubt very few people use this book now, but it was a popular book in the 90s. And so they say in the beginning, one of the things they write about is they say, Black social workers believe that social work had the promise and the power of lifting a perennially oppressed people from ultimate degradation to full-class American citizenship. How did Black social workers gain this faith? And why did they become so disillusioned with social work after having so much initial enthusiasm for it? Also, how did their growing disillusionment affect their definition of the problem and their confidence in the ability of Black masses to rise? Then they talk about an incident with some things that had happened, and they so it was you know, in the during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a lot of community work going on, and one of the things that, well, many things, but one of the things that we worked on was the fact that don't just take it. That was an ongoing coming out of the revolutionary, quote, revolutionary activities of the 60s and 70s, was definitely this fierceness about you don't have to take it. And so there were social workers who were in communities helping communities to make decisions about what it is they wanted, and then to figure out, okay, now how do we go about getting this? You know, there were social workers helping communities organize rent strikes. One of the things that was of common at times were boycotts. And so if you had a store owner who was very disrespectful to community members, feeling, you know, they were doing them a service by just being there, you know, they would have community meetings, people would complain about this store owner, and then people would say, okay, let's organize a boycott. and so people would just, you know, work, you know, have, you know, go around, talk to neighbors. And the idea was, you know, let's become powerful in our own community. Why do we feel that we have to take it? If people are disrespecting us, you know, our money, we are giving them money to buy their products. If they are going to insult us, why do we still keep giving them money? So people would stop shopping in that store. It might mean that they have to walk a few more blocks to another store, but the idea was that we do have power in community. We do have money. You know, we can use our money. You know, the idea of the wealth in the Black community is not as visible, because, you know, the folks who are writing, they don't want us to know just what wealth exists in our community. But there is wealth in the Black community, and it comes from going all the way back into the 1900s when you had Black entrepreneurs back then. And the idea back then was to keep the money in the community, build our own schools. Why are we begging somebody else to do it? We will do our own schools. We will have our own teachers. And so that idea was also prevalent in the 60s and 70s, where we felt that we need to bring resources into our communities, and the resources that are in the communities, we need to work very hard to keep them in the community as much as possible. And that was part of what social workers were involved in, you know, community planning, community organizing. Also, you had social workers who were developing organizations The other thing, I don't know how many of you heard like of Ocean Hill, Brownsville, but the Ocean Hill, Brownsville, when they took over the whole school system in Ocean Hill, Brownsville in the early 70s and just kicked all the teachers out, except, you know, the white teachers who were coming from Long Island because the teachers weren't teaching the kids. So what did they do? The black teachers remained, and they had parents who were working in other types of professions came and taught in the school. And from that movement came Al Van, who, because he was a teacher at the time, he was a leader of the boycott. And what happened, he became assemblyman and eventually was chair of the education committee in the New York State Assembly. All of the educational money decisions in the budget on the assembly side went through him. You know, so this was the concept that was had. You know, start in the community, build a community. But the other thing is that we got to have Black people in other parts of this structure that we're in, because if we can get to certain places in these other arenas and structures, it gives us the ability to help our communities. When I was in the health department, I really didn't want to work there because I'd always been in the Black community, but you know, I was advised to by my mentor. So I spent 6 years there, which was good. And one of the things is the section that I ran, we gave money to organizations in New York State to either open a health center or to add on to their health centers. And so what we did is we ensured that the eligibility criteria for a person to apply for these monies would not discriminate, would not make it hard for African American and Hispanic communities to get to these monies. And what we did on the quiet side is that we would provide technical assistance indirectly to help them to say, okay, this is how you need to write your grant so that when it comes in, you can score high in order to get monies to come back to the communities. So this was the thinking we had in the 70s. And so on, you know, various, you know, African Black people at that time, when we came out of colleges and stuff, we didn't, you know, some of us said, yes, we'll stay in the communities. Others said, let's get into these systems so that over time we can get into decision-making places within these various structures, so that then when the money starts flowing in and, you know, these grants get written and so forth, I mean, you know, the RFPs, requests for proposals and so forth, that we are in charge of these RFPs. We are in charge of the dissemination of $50 million. We are in charge of that, so that way we can get the monies into the communities. And at the same time, there's another sector of social workers who are in the community, who are helping the community to learn how to put a grant together, learn how do you write a grant, talk about how do you set up an organization from the ground up. You know, those of us, we have experience with that, where we started out with an idea and created organizations. I have a friend who did that, and now it's $100 million organization. I mean, so social work was, you know, we saw social work on a number of levels. Community level, we saw it, you know, individually, but we saw it politically, because the political structure, you know, if you understand the process here in New York State as well as in this country, the budget is determined by the legislature and the governor's office. And so if we don't have people situated in those places to ensure that when the pie is being carved, that, you know, some of those slices are coming back into our community. One of the things that I'm just so amazed at right now, I just think is so phenomenal, is that you have the Speaker of the Assembly and the majority leader of the Senate of New York State are 2 Black people. I can't believe that. I can't believe it. It's so awesome. So this is a short, I gotta stop. But I just want to, you know, say, you know, there's strength. we've done a lot. We've gotten to some, you know, look at all of you who are in school now or coming out of school with your degrees. You know, just look at you and then talk to your because your grandmothers are probably my generation, you know, and talk to them and ask them how it was then compared to what it is now. You know, so there has been tremendous movement, tremendous progress, and such beautiful. You're so beautiful, you know. I mean, I love, you know, watching you, seeing you, hearing you. I mean, you got young people doing some excellent scholarship work, you know, putting out these dissertations that are phenomenal. Yeah, it's good. And so I just want to give that balance so that as we look at, you know, what happened with George Floyd and others, and, you know, that's historical, it's been going on since slavery, that we balance it with this strength, our beauty, you know, our dexterity, our stamina, and our vision. You know, we have a tremendous vision. And that vision is important. So I hope as you go through this process, that it's a process where you feel invigorated, you feel like, you know, I like the phrase, bring it on. You know, it's like, bring it on, because we're here now. We got something to say. We're going to make change. And that's it. No apologies. None of that stuff. You know, it's about now we're ready and we're going to do. So, you know, my hands to you and go for it. That's all I have to say. I have to stop.
So I just want to say you're welcome, everyone. We begged Evelyn to join our chapter. It was a strong no for the first 3 times I asked. So you have a lot of fans, Evelyn. I know you weren't reading the comments, but you have a lot of fans, and you have everyone fired up and ready to go. We are going to change the profession.
That's it.
I want to hand it over. I want to hear from you, all those that have been talking in the chat box. You want to talk? Unmute yourself and talk.
I was going to say one thing. One of the prompts that we have for tonight is 3 questions that we had put out there prior to this. You know, Evelyn just gave us a historical perspective briefly, and we also want to hear from some current voices. The questions that we have are, how have you experienced or observed racism or white supremacy in the New York State chapter of NASW, in your social work education, or in your social work practice? We did a way to submit this anonymously. We can read out some responses that we've gotten, but first we want to open this up to the people who are on this call for their voices and their experiences.
I would like to thank Evelyn for clearing something up that's been a real problem for me understanding. And I don't know if it's a racist view or not, but one of my issues has always been, Evelyn, that I could never understand why Black people adopted the white man's church after the way slaves were treated in colonial times, or, you know, back in the day. Why they would adopt that hateful place never made sense to me. And you helped me understand that tonight, that it was the only safe place that they could go and have some community that wasn't interfered with, that they could build connection and help each other and be left alone. So that makes sense to me now, that was part of the reason, because otherwise it made no sense to me. So I appreciate learning that from you.
Okay, read these.
Thank you. I'd love to hear from some of the people in the audience. Do we have any BIPOC social workers who want to comment, talk about your experiences?
Okay, I'll say something. And that goes back to the classroom. Like, let's start right in the School of Social Work. when I was a student, and this is going to be 7 years ago for me, I'm an older student, so in my 20s. But at the time, there was an initiative that was started by one of our faculties of color that she wanted to start a, like a meeting, social workers of color, because there was in grad school this disconnect. Everybody was in their own silos, and it was really needed. And we didn't know we needed it until we met in that meeting for the first time, because there were students that were coming from overseas of color, as well as African American students. And we had no time to even be able to get together and be a community, to maybe even start getting to know one another. So it was started there and it was really a wonderful thing that happened. However, there was one meeting that happened that a couple of students that were not of color came in that meeting, and they said, that they felt, well, they are a color. They were making the point that, oh, well, we are a color, so we should be here too. And while we were polite in that meeting, and nobody, was disrespectful to the people that came in, it left something in myself that to this day I'm still affected by that, because then it's played out in several ways over the years in other spaces where people think it's racist for people of color to congregate, to be together, when in fact we are seeking a place of solitude, of safety, of being able to get to know one another in our own cultural way. That is strength, actually, for us to do that. And it was interrupted because of that particular interaction. And there was no understanding as to why it, even me at the time, I'm going to say at the time, where I didn't quite understand the fullness of them coming in to that space and how traumatizing it was. Until now, here we are, 2020, today, having this type of conversation, Evelyn, fantastic, teaching history that lots of us had not even, today is when I've heard some of the things that Evelyn said. And so that is an example of what I have experienced in terms of that, of racial incidents.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Barbara. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to share?
Hi, I'm Sean Landry. Going to graduate school was a series. I enjoyed it. I had a competitive program. However, when I read Dr. Sue's book on microaggressions, I felt like I could have written the book myself. He gave language to experiences I had had from high school through graduate school. And the last time I finished graduate school was in 2010 here in New York City. And just the invalidations, the out and out racism is not hard to address, or it's not hard for me to address, I'll put it that way. But the invalidations, the little micro insults, I spent more emotional time in class calling people on their stuff and saying, do you realize how insulting you were? Do you realize that what you said is a generalization? And then I was looking at my professors like, why do I pay you? This isn't a safe space. Why am I paying my tuition to pay you for me to be abused in class and for you to watch? So didn't make me miss popularity at grad school. didn't really help me make any networking, which is the things that you're supposed to have. I have this great degree from a school in New York City, but I have none of the networking that should have come along with it, because I refused to be disrespected in class every day when I paid good money just like everybody else. And I was a returning student, so I was older than a lot of my classmates. And it was during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And my professor was an older gentleman, and he just let me go at it one day because someone called the people in New Orleans refugees. And I lost my ever-loving mind. I lost my ever-loving mind because A, how dare you? B, not that they recognized it, but my family is from New Orleans. I had family that we couldn't even find for weeks on end. And for you to sit there in your upper middle class classroom, isolated, to call people refugees, I really think I had an out-of-body experience. To the point where I apologized to my professor at the end of class, and he said, I admired your restraint. I would have gotten them weeks ago. So, I mean, that was the experience. Like, I came to learn, but I had to also come to educate too. And I didn't feel like being, as so many people have said, the voice for the entire race of Afro-Americans, Afrocentric. Or it's like, why are you looking over here and every time you want to hear about a Black family? Read a book. So that was my high-priced experience in graduate school.
Thank you, Sean. I see that Dolores and Angela have their hands up. We'll let Dolores go first.
I wanted to thank the speaker. I didn't get her name right before. That just got off. I totally understand her emotions, her feelings. I think when you go into social work school and you're learning so many new things, and as you said, you're finally finding the words to the way you've been feeling, but to be so disappointed because you think that the professors and administration, they get it. You would hope, and to find out that they don't. And then you go and you work for nonprofit agencies where they make their money from people who are disenfranchised and who are marginalized, and you would hope they get it, and they don't. And it's like, what is going on here? You know, that you don't understand that you're still perpetuating the same racism that you claim, you know, in your mission statements to not. And so I guess that's what's most frustrating about the social work paradigm, in that you just went into it so fairy tale like, and to be so disillusioned that it's not what you hoped and what you thought it would be. And I'm really I'm so encouraged because I'm 60, and to have these conversations happening now is encouraging to me. So I just think that we do have to keep at it. We have to keep teaching. We have to keep learning. We have to keep communicating, finding ways to open. I mean, I'm so frustrated that I get so much pushback and racism from my fellow social workers, and but I don't give up. I want to continue finding ways to open this conversation and find vehicles to keep teaching folks about what we've gone through and what our pain is. Thank you.
I would like to say something. Evelyn, thank you so much for all this information and knowledge. I graduated from grad school in 2010 as well. I'm back in school-based health in the Bronx, and I'm coming back as a clinical supervisor, and been 3 months in, and with George Floyd and everything that's been going on in our communities, our agency asked for a anti-racist training presentation. No one volunteered. we are social workers. We are clinicians at this agency of Blacks and Latinos, and no one volunteered. I volunteered. And some of my colleagues were like, well, you're not Black. And I was like, no way, don't tell me that. That's, you know, discovery at 41 years old. But I was just so disappointed. And then I had other Latino colleagues come to me and tell me, oh, well, all lives matter and all Latino lives, you know, Latino lives matter too. And it was just this defensiveness, like that I wasn't just staying in my box and doing what I was supposed to do. And why am I speaking out? And isn't that someone else's issue? And isn't that someone else's problem? And we're serving the South Bronx, like mind blown. So I got one of my supervisees. I told her, you know, they only offer this to supervisors, but you're passionate about this, and we've spoken about this during supervision because it's affecting the students that we're counseling, and come on board. And she was game for it, and we're going to present in next week, and we're working on it every night. But being a part of this tonight, oh, all the notes I took, my goodness, it's a gift to have been here. So thank you so much.
I just want to quickly touch on kind of piggybacking off of the disappointment. I'm a current undergraduate student. I'm a social work major at Marist College. And, you know, with everything going on, Black Lives Matter movement, I was emailing my professors for about a month for just the social work association at my school to even just post a statement that, you know, that they're here for the Black students in the program. And I'm not really sure why it took, I mean, at Marist, the program, there's probably 5 people of color in the program. So it's kind of like, why did it take one of the 5 to push it for a month to just put a 2 to 3 sentence statement out? Like, we're all social workers, and the fact that no one saw the issue besides a person of color really disappointed me. Also, this past semester, I took a course, my multicultural social work, and as I said, I was probably the one of 2 Black students in that class, and honestly, it was kind of just like me and her leading the conversation. And I'm not so much disappointed in the professor, because the professor was trying to push it, but it would be like crickets if me and the other girl didn't speak up and try to start a conversation. And when we did, it was kind of like we were talking to ourselves. Like, none of the white social work students who are studying to become social workers, we are dealing with minority populations, and they can't even have a conversation with a minority classmate. How are you going to have that conversation with your clients? Like, that is so concerning for me. And I mean, I brought up this town hall idea to my social work professors at Marist, so I'm excited to get back to school in a couple weeks and really see if change will happen. Because, you know, words are just words if no action follows. So I'm hoping that something will change, but this talk was really inspiring. So I just wanted to say that as a social work student in my undergraduate. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. I know that Angela has been waiting for quite some time, if you want to go. And then Gretchen. I don't know if I pronounced these names right.
But I'm waiting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to add on something that Ms. Laundrie mentioned. Thank you for what you said. You mentioned about the invalidation. So I teach at I'm an adjunct at one of the social work schools, and of course I am a social worker and went to social work school as well. And in that invalidation, I really see the invisibility of Black folk. Whether it's in the curriculum, in terms of what literature that's chosen, whether it's professors, adjunct or otherwise, and the few adjunct that are Black or just people of color, we don't get a chance to meet each other. You don't get an opportunity to conversate, the few of us that are there. In terms of professors in the schools, and it's not just my own personal experience from being in the school of social work, but what other students have said. The fact that when there are racial concerns in the classroom, the professor are really unable to navigate what happens, whether it's an uncomfortable situation, whether it's just, supporting someone. They just are challenged by that, whether they're elder like myself or younger, they're challenged. And I think the schools of social work really need to address that issue. So yeah, basically it's that invisibility. We're there in plain sight, and yet somehow we're not represented in the place we needed to be. Also in administration. Most of the social work schools are predominantly Caucasian, right, in administration. I can't imagine that there are not Black and other people of color that could hold some of those positions. So thanks for allowing me to speak.
Can I get in line to say something? So first, hi, I'm lurking from Ohio. I'm not from North Carolina. I'm from New York. I got my undergrad from The Ohio State University, and then I'm currently getting my graduate degree from there as well. First, I want to say thank you to Evelyn. One thing she pointed out that was very whoa to me was that W.D. Du Bois was a social worker. The only reason I ever heard his name in undergrad was because I had a sociology minor, and that's the only time he was ever really discussed. So when you were like, oh, he was a social worker, I was just like, and no one brings this up? That's huge. So in my undergrad at OSU, I always felt very respected, and we had these huge Black Lives Matter banners at the front of our building, and when the banner got defaced, they put them in the window so nobody could take them down. They were always very vocal. Classroom discussions were always very respectful, and I thought I'm so lucky to have this college. And then I get to field placements, and I just start getting disrespected left and right and up and down, and hearing things that I'm just like, whoa. And then I go to the college about this, and they're like, okay, but don't say anything because we want to keep these professional relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm just like, what is this energy you guys have in the classroom where you want us to speak up, you want us to advocate, you want us to point out injustice, and then we get to field placements. I had a woman when I was absent one day say, wow, it's so quiet without Gretchen in the office. Another one, we were doing a mental health seminar in the community, and I mentioned, okay, well, if we're going to be talking about mental health, what's our plan if someone says something that's suicidal ideation? And she goes, well, it's in a whiter affluent suburb, so that's not an issue. Stuff like that I'm just yeah. What on earth are you saying to me? And I would go to the College of Social Work and just I can't believe this is happening. They're like, okay, just make some notes for your field liaison, we'll deal with it, don't raise any bells. In that placement, it was me, who was an Afro-Latina woman, 2 other Hispanic women, 1 Black woman, and 2 white women. We were all students, and then we were supervised by 3 white women. And one of the white women pulled aside our only Black, completely Black intern, and said, some of the faces you're making during meetings are really discouraging. And we would experience stuff like this all the time, saying we were being really loud when we were talking to each other. Of course, only the women of color were being loud when we were talking to each other. And we want to make sure we're not leaving the white women out of the conversations when we're talking about things, stuff like that. And it got to the point that I actually, during a meeting, had to sit down and say, okay, here is our code of ethics. I've printed it out for you. Here's everything you're doing that's making us uncomfortable, to the point that no one else felt comfortable to speak, so I had to do it. Here's why we're telling you this is uncomfortable and where we're called to do it. And here's where we think you guys can improve on yourselves. And that resulted in retaliation from one of the supervisors, and the other supervisor was super thankful for it. And later the College of Social Work was like, oh, wow, Gretchen, that's so awesome that you stood up for yourself. And I'm like, really? Because you were telling me not to for months. And now I do have a reputation amongst the College of Social Work as being like feisty and being known to call things out. And I have a reputation during projects to be the one to ask questions and to ask things. I have a feeling now that I'm in my master's getting my field placement, it has affected my ability to get a good placement quickly, because I do have this reputation now. So, so like now that I see everything that social work is doing, and I'm like, okay, you teach us to be advocates and you teach us to call things out, and then we get in the real world and everyone's like, don't. And then I see the NASW blocking a Black woman who says like, hey, this is unethical. I see them releasing the statement that it's like, we're not sorry because you all were trolling. Like, where are these ethics that you guys wrote? What's happening? So that was my 2 cents.
Can I share
Keep
my
making
experience?
good trouble.
Yes.
I would like to share my experience that I had in grad school. So I'd like to say to Evelyn, it is wonderful to see you again. It's always a pleasure. I graduated in the class of 2005, and I was an older student. I was like the mother of the students because I was working a full-time job, I was a single mom, and I was determined to get my master's degree. I'm the only student at SUNY Albany who received a letter saying that I did not get into their program. And I also have a letter saying that I did get into the program. So I framed, those 2 things need to be framed, because they kept saying, well, I couldn't get in because I got a C when I was non-matriculated. It made no sense to me. But my comment is that when we were in school, I felt like a lot of students had very racist opinions, comments, and they were not addressed. And when we said something, we were looked at as, why are you so radical? So we were the radical class of 2005 because we spoke up and we called students out on their stuff. Sometimes that was a little disruptive. Professors could not finish what they were trying to teach. But I was coming in from having my bachelor's. I went in the field before going back to grad school. So sitting in class, I found it to be somewhat ridiculous, sitting there listening to people teaching out of books that have never been in the field, have never worked with people. They talked about poor people as if it was, they were aliens or something. They talked about social problems from the book. And when you bring up, well, no, that's not really how it is, professors who had never been there were like, what am I talking about? I'd get pulled along the side to be spoken to. Like, are you serious? How about teaching a class or doing a class on illicit bias? Why are we not training social workers how to deal with different types of people? You know, you're coming from, you know, how many social workers would say, well, I've never even been, you know, this is the first time I've ever been around Black or Latino students or Latino people, Black and Latino people. This is the first time I've ever been around them, and yet you want to be a social worker. So you go out and we say we do no harm, right? I've seen social workers do some crazy things and say some crazy things, and you can't always intervene to say, you know, don't say that, or why are you saying that? When I had my field placement, like the young lady says, she struggled with her field placement. In one of my field placements, I had a lady that was so threatened by me that she would never want to address me in front of the other interns. And she would try to pull me into a small, tiny room where nobody else is around so that she could say what she had to say. And the last time that she did that, I had to, you know, like I said, I was a grown woman. I wasn't a 20-year-old. So I had to like set her straight, like, no, we're not doing that. We're in upstate New York, but let's not get it twisted. I'm a Bronx girl all the way. Always been from the Bronx. That's what's in my heart and in my soul. I went to the field office and complained. She called before I got there, and they tried to tell me, what did I say to her? I'm like, are you kidding me? They would not find me another placement. I had to leave and find my own placement in order to be able to continue in the program and graduate on time. I had to find my own placement because I was looked at as radical. I speak up too much. I'm saying and telling people what's really going on out there. Some of these field placements, they don't want us as students. They don't want older students because they feel like they could tell us anything. You can't just tell me anything because I've been out there working in the field 15, 20 years. You can't just tell me anything. I'm willing to be the student, but I think we have to be more careful when we send students out to the field, and we need to make sure that these people want to train us, because I don't feel, quite honestly, my 2 years of school and graduate school, I didn't need field placement. There was very little a field placement person could have taught me, but I went in, tried to have an open mind. I felt people were extremely racist. And even on jobs, I can tell you, I've been a social worker over 30 years, and I can tell you, I lost a job because I went in and cleaned up a program that they asked me to clean up. And when the people who I supervised went and complained, they said all the buzzwords. I was hostile, I was mean, I created a hostile environment. I was the only Black person on the management team. No one supported me, no one. They all knew what was going on at this agency. It's a local agency in the Capital District. Everybody knew what was going on, but nobody wanted to address any of the issues. And because they said that I was hostile, I was mean, and I didn't treat my staff with respect, which everybody that knows me know that that's just not, I don't even know who they would describe it. I kept looking at the lady like, what are you talking about? I lost my job. A management position as a social worker, I lost that job because somebody can come and say anything about you, and because I'm a Black female and people are threatened, they didn't even question it. They didn't question it. They didn't take my word. Nobody took my back. So I just think we have to do more to be supportive to each other. And there was nobody I could turn to. And that's happened more than once, you know, and it's okay, because you know what, at the end of the day, I feel like as a social worker, there's always social problems. We don't ever have to worry about having a job because we always will have work, you know. We just have to be ready to deal with the foolishness when we speak up and we advocate for our children. I advocate for children every day, love working with children, but everybody's not out there for the kids. Everybody's not out there for our families. Thank you for this forum. I appreciate it.
So I know I have my hand raised for a bit. But one of the things that first I want to thank for being involved. One of the problems, I believe, I remember reading this book called The White Architects of Black Education. And I'm saying that because the social work as we know it has primarily been designed by people of privilege. And of course, people of privilege are going to promote their perspective. Their perspective is rarely, if ever, inclusive or one which treats others as equals. Just like the concept, his story. I would rather not even use the term his story, because his story is generally told from the perspective of the victors. And having conversations about the past, I would prefer stories of the past, which suggests that we need to include multiple stories, multiple perspectives in our analysis in order to get the best possible picture of whatever it is that we're talking about. So there's for me, no puzzle why there's racism and elitism in the social work field, primarily because it has been established by racists and elitists. I mean, what do you expect? You know what I mean? I made mention of in one of the posts in the chat, is that you mean to tell me that there was no social work prior to Jane Addams. I mean, to even think that that is the reality is really the problem, you know, because we have, you know, linked the whole history of the discipline to a relatively new, a new story, so to speak. And the first paper I wrote in the doctoral program at the Silverman School of Social Work was that the prophets were the first social workers. Now, that was a foreign idea to a lot of people, you know what I mean? And that's primarily because people that we generally conceptualize as prophets, we generally impose upon them a mythical Jesus perspective rather than historical Jesus. Mythical Jesus is the Jesus that, you know, was very passive, turned the other cheek, and all this other kind of stuff. But historical Jesus was the guy that went down to Wall Street and threw up the tables and was basically fighting against, you know, economic oppression and riba, or let's just say high interest rates, and how people were being abused. If that's not the work of social work, I don't know what the work of social work is. When you think about Moses and all these other guys, you know what I mean? You know, so, you know, among the problems that we have in our conceptualization about social work, it is often narrowed into this clinical perspective, this person-centered kind of approach. And one of the fortunate things about Silverman is that they don't have that kind of perspective. They include, you know, multiple tracks of social work: community organizing, activism and advocacy, in that perspective, in addition to clinical stuff and community and organizational things. So part of the problem is what we think social work is. I don't know if you ever ran into certain illustrious professors like Mimi Abramovich, you know what I mean, who is a star, you know what I mean, in social work. She's also at the Silverman School of Social Work, but she has a national reach. And she, you know, for me, was one of the first people, because she taught a lot of policy and gender studies, you know, to just ask the question, you know, who wins and who loses, you know, in terms of even policy development. And so among the things, the same thing with social work. You know, someone already mentioned, often when we talk about quote unquote clients, you know, they are generally the underprivileged, the disadvantaged, people of the lower class and people of color. You know, and so if you're sitting in a classroom and you're hearing all this presentation, the use of these type of examples, you're going to feel some kind of way about that as well. So that's what I think a lot of the problems that we are experiencing in the discipline is because it's rooted and still presented from a Western / Eurocentric perspective, as if that is the only conceptualization of social work. And you know, I'll say this to myself, and I continue to say this to the students that I teach, that the real education takes place outside of the classroom. You can't believe everything these professors are saying. And I'm a professor, you know what I mean? And I say, you know, and I'm going to end on this note. Who do you think is the most dangerous person in your life? A politician or a professor? Often the students will say the politician, but I say, no, it's the professor, because you believe them. You know what I mean? Just because they are the professor, you don't check behind them. You don't ask about their sources. You don't ask about their personal history. You don't ask anything about them. You just accept what they say. And that becomes your way of thinking, because part of the way we learn in this country is like a banking system. You put a few coins in and you regurgitate the same coins, you know something. So if we're just as students repeating, you know, these racist and oppressive conversations and ideologies and ways of thinking, we're going to continue to get the same thing. So, you know, I'm happy to have been, you know, involved in this conversation and listening to people and all this kind of stuff. But the thing we have to do is we have to get to the, what's this group? The people that established the social work curriculum in the school. Because if you don't begin to this conversation among students, you're going to have the same tension in the discipline from here on out. Thank you very much. I hope everyone has a great day. And I want to ask, are the chat notes going to be saved?
Yes, sir. We will be sending out a recording and then the chat comes up with the recording, because we want to make sure we save this information. And I appreciate what you added. Everyone's making this so unbelievably awesome, so much better than we even imagined. Monique, you've had your hand up for a long time.
And I have too many calls going at the same time. I hate to exit, but I have to exit, and I'd like to give a shout out to my colleague, Dr. Jewett, who's also from Nassau Community College. You guys have a great day. Assalamu alaikum, sister. Yes. We're gonna stay on top of this, but I just had to get some word in and represent Nassau Community College. Okay, folks, have a great day.
You too. Monique, you want to go next?
I do. I'm sorry for the hip hop Harry in the background. I'm a mom first, so we're all home now. But I have to agree with Wilhelmina. I thought it was important for you guys to hear about my internship experience at a major hospital system here in New York. I live downstate. I live in the city. I live on Long Island. And so I walked into my internship with 15 years of case management experience, 8 of which was with ACS. And when I walked in, I was the other students were very young. I walked in with a 2-year-old, and she might have been months at the time. I walked in September, and I gave birth in May. So I'm pretty much driven. I know what I'm going to do at this point. So when I went in, they were just starting a child abuse dynamic to their social work, and they had a child abuse social worker, and they had a case come in, and they wanted my opinion. And I said, okay, well, tell me the story. Now, having done ACS for 8 years, it's pretty rough in the city. And so you say certain things, and it just becomes very much second nature. So the short version is the kid came to the hospital high, 18 months old. And the parents had this long, elaborate story about how this 18-month-old walked down the steps and then went into the refrigerator and opened the CBD oil and drank the CBD oil and put the top back on and then went back up the steps, and that's why the child couldn't wake up. The child was high. And I immediately said the parents are lying, the child ate edibles. In the meetings following that, what I heard about myself was she's too cocky and she thinks she knows a lot. And, I don't know why she would give that answer. And it was almost, my question then in the meeting that I had was, too cocky for what? I'm not exactly sure, where you're coming from with this, because if I've done it for 8 years and you're just starting, I've not been a child abuse social worker, but I've studied child abuse in and out in New York City. And if you work in New York City, you can go anywhere. I was in Bed-Stuy removing kids every 6 weeks. People were prostituting their 12-year-olds. And I was hands-on. So I'm not sure. So I asked, very nicely, too cocky for what? Well, the other students, and I was like, well, I've been working for 13 years in case management. So when you asked me a question, so my question then was, why did you even ask me? Why did you even ask me? Why? Well, Monique, we just want you to be, less aggressive with your approach. And saying all that to say, when my actual supervisor, when it came down to it, she was very honest with me, and she was not a woman of color. She said, it's because you're Black and you had the right answer. They were wrong. The answer that you said, come to find out the children were removed from the house, and the child abuse social worker was saying, but they just seem like such nice people. I don't think that they would do that. And I was like, it's a matter of a mistake. And that's understanding child abuse and neglect. Sometimes things happen by accident. They get high, they have edibles, they probably were high and didn't realize this 18-month-old saw brownies and probably ate about 4 of them. So he's gonna be in the hospital for a while, and so you have to deal with the accident. When I was told that it was that I was Black, I was only there for another couple of months because I'd experienced racism, but I'm also a New Yorker. So the experience with racism is a little different in New York. It's just different. But if I was not as strong as I was to hear that I was Black, and it was the first time that me being Black and me being experienced was a problem, I might have walked away from the profession. And I have been taking care of kids as long as I walked out of school in 2004, walked into ACS in 2007, and up until now, I'm a director of pediatric case management, which I don't know if anybody works with the Department of Health, but which is a whole movie, even trying to advocate for them. I just feel like even when we're talking about field placements, because of this generational racism that exists in the people, and then those people become social workers, I really do feel like it needs to be addressed in the classroom. We need to, I went to Stony Brook and we had very candid conversations where people would ask me, I don't know, my parents are really racist. I don't know if this racist. And I'm not about being a complete advocate for the whole Black race. But if you're interested in learning, some of the differences between us and some of the things you probably should not say in a group of African American people, I can kind of help you with that. I've been African American for some time, so I can kind of help you with that. But it needs to be addressed in the rooms. I have friends that go to Hunter that were crying because they were the only person that were able to address it at all. And when they were able to address it, again, it was cut off. But when you talk about getting into the professional realm, I feel like you may lose a lot of us because nobody wants to deal with, you have to deal with walking home in the dark, and then you have to deal with your Black brothers and sisters, and then you have to deal with getting choked out by the cops, and so it becomes really difficult to be everywhere. Now you can't even go to work without being called aggressive or cocky because you in fact are smart and a woman of color. So I just thought that was important to share.
Thank you so much. That was really powerful. Thank you. Next, we have Arash, who has his hand raised.
Yes, hi. Wanted to thank everyone for putting this event on and everyone who's been speaking. It's been lovely to hear all of you and hear about your experiences. I had two things to share. Well, one share and one question. The share is, I worked at an extremely progressive, pretty renowned agency, large agency. And I think they are the kind of folks who would naturally be considered allies in this kind of situation. And they have they do direct services, also very famous for their advocacy. And so they're often kind of on the forefront of a lot of these issues, or they're perceived to be. Having worked there, I saw kind of like the replication of the typical structures, like people of color, like kind of passed over for promotions, never engaged in any proactive way of like, hey, you would be good for this role. Let's cultivate you for that. We need you here. People who knew the front line better than anyone, had been working for 8 years. Their, clients loved them. Everyone loved them. They were very brilliant. And just like, I talked to one Black woman who had worked there for 8 years, was like my mentor, like basically initiated me into the field. And she didn't apply for the supervisory position right above her. And when I asked her why, and she had her master's degree, she had everything, like there was no barriers. It was kind of like, it should have been like an open and shut case. And she was like, I don't think they want me, right? And like, this is a very progressive agency, right? And like, she didn't apply. And then like when that position emptied out again, because the person they brought in wasn't a good fit in the first place, the director position above that supervisor position had also changed, and that director had enough like vision and foresight to actually approach my colleague directly and say like, I would really love it if you applied for this, you would be great. And she applied, and she was their best supervisor for 2 years before she left, ultimately because the agency wasn't going to change. And this is, so I just kind of want to like, I'm wondering about how we deal with the problem of our allies kind of having the knife in our back. Like some of our most visible allies have it kind of like selling us out, like they can agree to the values, they can sign off on all the letters, but ultimately the way they're doing they're doing it so the way they do business doesn't have to change. Recently, and this agency is subject to a unionizing effort, and recently when questioned about like their politics with people of color, they were like, 51% of our executive team are people of color. And they actually, it's a massive agency. They had to include their program directors in that to make that calculation work. but really it's like out of the 4 senior vice presidents, the 4 like C-suite executives, and this like, there's a president, all of them are white men except for 1 white woman and 1 black woman, right? So basically what they're saying is like, hey, we have like a lot of program managers who are Black, people of color, women of color, who are all being directly managed by a bunch of white men. And then they're changing that into like, we are 51% people of color led. So, and that's just like so sick. Like they can't be allowed to do that. That's just like, it should be criminal. I mean, like, I don't know how to criminalize it, but it's not correct. Like you can't do that and then claim to be an ally and you're like selling people out and profiting off of their oppression. So I think this is common. It's none of our first years in the profession probably, or for those of us who are people of color, I think it's not our first time kind of seeing this kind of play out in liberal circles. So I wonder what we can do about that and what it looks like to have concrete demands that force change. And then the other thing was just a question. I was wondering how our chapter, the state chapter, is connected to the city chapter. Because some folks that I organize with in New York have been trying to meet with the New York City chapter about their police reform agenda, and just to talk about it, and kind of connect and have that grassroots input. And it's been hard to make that happen, even though initially they were trying to set that up with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for adding that. I just want to address a couple of things you said from a chapter level. So we're 2 separate chapters. New York State, New York City are 2 completely separate chapters. We do talk to them, like I talk to all the EDs and all the chapters, but we are 2 separate chapters. And so we do have an email address for them that we give people to contact them. Amelia will put that in the chat box. That being said, we do cover the whole state. We definitely have people from New York City who reach out to us and we answer their questions. Like, we're not going to tell you no because you live in New York City. Like, we want you to be part of that. I liked how you brought up the allies and how we work with allies who may not be allies and all of that. I don't know that I have the answer to that. I do want to plug some of our other initiatives though. That because this is our anti-racism plan, we're hitting it in several different areas. One is the education. All our anti-racism trainings are free for members. And then we will also offer at least 3 of them free for everyone so that they have access to the material. We're also doing social justice forums to where we're breaking out into small groups and having conversations about race and difficult things to have conversations about. We had the first one in June. It was incredibly popular. These small groups are co-facilitated with someone with white privilege and someone who's Black or brown. And these are really to look at that self-reflection. So this is a good place for allies to go because we try to get really at the root of some of that racism and how it comes across, even when you think you're woke or not woke, and what that can look like. And it also trains people on having difficult conversations. So this is good. This is a good forum for some of these schools of social welfare and how you can have the difficult conversations without it turning into, calling each other names and demeaning people. It's possible. I've done the work for years. So that's what that group does. So I think there's a place there, but also with this initiative, these town halls and the work groups we're going to form, I'm imagining that one of our goals is representation, that we need to have representation at every level with social work. So if we're talking about schools of social work, that means deans, that means faculty members. If we're talking about organizations, that means CEOs, not the second line like you were talking about. You're talking about the second line answering to the white people. But then saying that it's diverse. So I would see that 100% being one of our goals in every area, is that the representation. Evelyn, who is very popular, is also running one of our initiatives, and she's running the Action Initiative, and she's really focusing on how do we make policy change. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at things like the school system. We know how inherently racist the school system is. So we're going to be looking for volunteers to help do some of that research, like putting together the data. Do we look to strengthen Brown versus the Board of Education, or do we look to write new policy? You know, so those are things we're going to be looking at doing, and we're going to use stats, we're going to use research to back that up. So that's Evelyn. She's in charge of that. We've already done 2. We have the second one recorded. The third one's already scheduled for the end of August. We have our resource page, which I put in the chat box a couple of times. So that's just resources, and you have put so many resources in the chat box tonight. So hopefully we can start to get those uploaded on our resource page. And then this is the last initiative we started, which is to change the profession. After listening to all of you, I know we can do this. There's too much passion, there's too much work. We know our history, we're gonna keep learning our history, and we can do it. And I just wanna acknowledge that we're over time, but I'm Native, and in my culture, time is a suggestion. Like you work until you're done. Anyone can leave whenever they want, but I want to, you know, open this back up to anyone else. If anyone else wants to comment or say something, we don't want to shut it down before people have the opportunity to talk. Judith has her hand up.
I just want to say first, thank you so much for, I'm happy I found the invite. I think it's just great to just have this discussion among our peers and just openly feel safe. And my segue into saying the word safe, that we can express ourselves and openly share our experience at grad school and at work. And I think because where I work, it's a dual organization. It's an educational and also a clinic where we teach up and coming, you know, doctors and things like that. And oftentimes I get into, you know, these little, I don't want to say tit for tat, or, you know, just having to advocate on behalf of my students, where professors will call students because they can't pronounce their names properly. And that's really bothersome. And I noticed this, I don't know if anybody wants to do a study with me, but I find it very disrespectful when you cannot pronounce someone's name and you make a character's name. So just short story, a professor was looking for a student and he was like, "Where's Jackie Chan?" I'm like, "I don't have a Jackie Chan in my group. I don't know what you're talking about." And I'm like, "You know who I'm talking about?" I'm like, "I absolutely don't know who you're talking about." I thought maybe, and I had to look on my roster to look, and I don't have a Jackie Chan. "Oh, Tony." But because, you know, oftentimes I notice students change their names in between semesters because they feel more comfortable, because they're not, people, again, can't pronounce their names, which I feel that you should, your parents took the time to name you. People should learn to take the time to pronounce it properly or say it correctly. Short story is that I told the professor, I said, "I don't think he likes to be called Jackie Chan." And he's like, "No, he likes it." And he's like, "I don't think he does. And I don't think it's appropriate." And I guess I said it the way I said it. He's like, no, he likes it. I'm like, "No. His name is," I won't say the student's name, but I said the student's name. "If he likes to be called Tony, like you call me Judy, even though my name is Judith, that's fine. But calling him a character in a book or a movie, Jackie Chan, the actor, I don't think it's appropriate, and I think it's very offensive. And I know I met your son, so I would not call your son a character out of a movie." So, okay, oh, you know, and a couple of minutes later, he came back and told me, he says, "You know, if I offended you," I said, "You didn't offend me. I'm just want to share something with you. And I hope you learned from what I said. I hope it didn't come off like, you know, I'm being aggressive." And I actually said that word. And I felt, why am I saying that word about correcting you? And he's like, you know, I'm just playing around. And I was like, you have to take it into stride how we treat our students, and calling somebody a character or actor is inappropriate. And that kind of makes it uncomfortable for And the student's not going to say anything because why? It's a professor. You have to give me a grade at the end of the year, correct? So, and I spoke to the student on the side too, and I said, listen, if you don't feel comfortable, it's like, no, you know, it's okay, it's okay. And I'm like, if you can say, I don't feel comfortable being called Jackie Chang, and I will advocate on your behalf. So don't be afraid to say it. And I think cultural competency, and I guess that's my question to everyone. I think at one point,
It looks like Judith froze. Hopefully she'll be able to come back and join us. What a disturbing story she's telling us too. Okay, it looks like it kicked her out. Hopefully she'll hop right back on. Does anyone else want to share while we're waiting for Judith?
One thing I wanted to just mention while we are waiting for Judith and while someone might raise their hand is we've also created, we have an anonymous mechanism to share stories and experiences with us. We have set up a Google form to collect stories anonymously for the reason of protecting any social worker out there who might, feel like they don't want to come forward themselves and share these stories. This data will be used to support the work that we end up doing. And we also think that they can be used, we want to use them as ways to speak out the experiences of BIPOC social workers in New York State. So if there's anyone here who feels uncomfortable speaking these stories out on a public forum, that will also be included in the follow-up email. We hope to be able to use this data to support the work that we do in the work groups going forward. And I will send that link in the comment right now.
To follow up with Amelia, we also have another project called Spirit of Social Work, where we're collecting stories from social workers across New York on how their agency, their education, whatever system they're working in, how it's responded to the Black Lives Matter movement, how it's responded to this anti-racism movement and COVID itself. And we would love to hear how you or your agency has responded to it as well, because I think it's important for us as the NASW to see like how others have worked around these issues, and everyone else can learn from it as well. And shout out to Barbara, who's on my committee and helped us with this.
Well, if she's not back yet, is it okay if I chime in? Thanks. So yeah, I mean, this was a great event. I really appreciate this and all that NASW is doing to give us the skills to be able to address this in both the workplace, for our clients, for our peers, for the entire organization. So I really appreciate this. I know for me personally, there've been a lot of trainings that I've gone to with NASW, and not just with NASW. This is like everybody does this. We're all, the only people of color are the people, the clients. It's never the staff member or the doctor. Uh-oh, now my dogs are barking. So in any case, that was a big issue for me over the years, is always feeling like, why do they always only see us as patients? They never invite us in to be the trainers. They never invite us in to be the, if they do make the video or whatever, we're the patient on the table, not the doctor providing the treatment. So, yeah. But other than that, yeah. And I guess I had not felt, I hadn't gotten involved with the Black NASW, but I had considered getting involved with Black NASW because I hadn't really necessarily felt like the organization was interested in, my perspective as a woman in the field, mother trying to work and, not necessarily understanding what it is that I was dealing with. And even like the events that they still do, like in my area, not really things I'm interested in doing. I still don't want to go out and have drinks
in the night. My son's growing up, but now I'm involved in organizations. You know, I don't have time for that kind of involvement. That's not where my interests lie, in being involved in the community. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being
Gabrielle.
our chapter. Sorry, go ahead. Barbara, go ahead. And then Judith also came back too. So Barbara, why don't you go ahead and then we can hear Judith finish her story.
Okay, Gabrielle, thank you so much for saying what you did. There's 2 points. One is and that's the NASW. I'm just going to put in the chat that we can be part of, because we're social workers, it would be a good thing for us to be part of as many organizations as possible, because this narrative, what we're talking about today, is global. It's a global issue. And a lot of us social workers have been so busy working in our independent silos through no fault of our own. Like you said, we may be the only person working, if at all, in an organization. So unfortunately, we don't get to be like, you know, seen all the time. And that's a problem that I've seen as well. I think that there's a pipeline issue, like right at the start, like how people can even rise up and become those peoples who are presenting, the people who are in leadership. And because right now, if you're starting out in grad school and you're feeling like the BSW student, and she's feeling like she's hearing all of this tonight, you know, hey, hang in there. But, you know, we have had our challenges, you know, with staying with a profession that I'm sure a lot of us had good intentions of being a part of. So we have to basically learn now. Now's the time for us to start reaching out to all different places that we can be in and talk to them. You know, if you're in the VA, be part of VA social work organization. If you're sports, there's a sports social worker association. And I love that. We've got to be in every place that we can think of and start talking up the profession and start advocating for all of us, because we all have to have improved outcomes for this.
Thank you, Barbara. Judith, did you want to finish your story?
My internet was in and out, so sorry about that. No, I just wanted to ask the group, I was like, you know, what do they think of, like, you know, cultural competency being incorporated in organizations, and especially education, where people have to recognize and have to express their, people generalizing ethnicities and groups and things like that. So I just wanted to hear from the group, what do they think about incorporating that into making it mandatory for organizations to have such a thing, course.
Thank you, Judith, for sharing. Does anyone else want to share?
Judith asked about cultural competency. I like how you talk about that notion. Do you want to? She was asking, like, should organizations have cultural competency? We just had a discussion about it, and I loved how Notion talked about this. Can you tell them, like, how you were, like, saying this?
It was more of a rant, and I'm sorry, Judith. My audio is coming in and out, so I think I missed your question. I'm so sorry. And it really was more of a rant, and I see Bonnie, and yes, I have to agree, because my rant was that you can't be competent in a culture. I have such a diverse culture, and I'm not competent in it whatsoever. If I'm not competent in my own culture, I can't be competent in someone else's. No one can be competent in culture. It doesn't make sense. And I agree that I even feel like cultural humility doesn't even begin to properly emphasize or cover or encompass that idea that we're trying to push for, which is that you should just know how to accept and be open and be more aware of other people's culture, and actively be aware that you're not pushing your own standards or ideas onto other people's culture as well, because the idea of cultural competency to me is to make sure that you're aware of other people's culture and you're not pushing your own ideas, values onto others and violating what they believe in as well, or their identity or anything like that, which is why to me cultural competency is not a proper word, because once again, you can't be competent in it. If I could, my parents would be really proud of me because I would be following their culture properly. But yeah, cultural humility does start covering it a little more, but I think like we should really be on the search to find a better way to encompass what we're trying to say. Yes. And thank you for that question, Judith. And I'm so sorry that I completely didn't hear it.
Thank you, Notion. So we are at 8:15. Again, this doesn't bother me at all. It's kind of how I work. But I just want to see, we started, I think at our highest point, we had 150 or more people on the call. We still have 48. I couldn't be more thrilled. I think this has been amazing. I want to see if anyone has any last thoughts they want to share or anything before we leave each other. And I really hope that everyone that was on here, I hope you join us on the 27th when we start the work and identify those goals, because I know we can change this profession. The energy, the intelligence, the teamwork on this call, we've got this. So I know this is going to happen, and I want all of you on this journey with us. We'll start to ask for people who want to lead groups, co-lead groups. So think about it. Think about if that's what, if that's something you want to do, do you want to work with someone else? Do you want to take one of these initiatives? Start to think about that. But I'll be quiet for just a second in case anyone wants to add anything. Amelia, did I talk about everything I'm supposed to talk about at the end?
Yes.
Oh, I just want to add, I put this on the chat, but do follow us on all of our social media. Amelia and the staff work so hard on it, and they're constantly updating with great information. And if you follow, you'll be able to get like on-time updates on everything as well.
Yes, and I interrupt if you want to talk. I just want to thank Notion and Evelyn for co-facilitating this and for bringing everything that you bring to the chapter. I so appreciate it. I want to thank Amelia for keeping my head straight and for being so organized. And we also have Amanda Mulvihill and Alice Ackerman, who are chapter staff who've been on the call and just doing background work. We have the best staff, and we have the best volunteers, the best members. So I just want to thank everyone. Evelyn, do you want to lead us out? I think it's only fitting. You're the most popular person here. You want to say our very final words and then we'll go out? You're on mute. I'm going to unmute you. You got to unmute you.
Okay, I got it. I had to move the arrow. All right, so a lot's been said. We use the language lived experience. I want to share this because I was thinking about it for myself. Notwithstanding all of the history and experiences and the racism and sexism, all that stuff that's, in my own life, I am very happy being a Black woman. I love being a Black woman. And there has been such a joy in being a Black woman. And there are times, you know, and I'm up in Albany now, but I'm a New Yorker. Like I heard a person said they from the city. I'm a city person in my heart. I love the city, and when I go back, I go to Bed-Stuy where I lived, or, you know, it's changed. So, you know, I have memories of how it was, but I just love being Black, you know? And there's a beauty. There's beauty in our lives. You know, I love driving by the high school and looking at the young Black boys and girls, you know, and I laugh, you know, just like looking at them. Yeah, you know. So I think it's important for us to check in with our own heart and see if we like our life. Nothing is promised. It's not always going to be sugar, okay? And more than likely, let's just deal with it. We're going to be dealing with racism until we leave here. You know, I mean, that's just the way it is. Because we're humans, and there will be people who, no matter what, they're not going to like us, right? But we do our best. We make decisions on when we're going to say enough, okay? And we don't back down from that. And that's part of the inner strength. And I think of loving ourselves and not feeling that we have to apologize for who we are. And no, we don't have to respond every time some white person, you know, talk about Black people, and we got to be the authority. We have the choice. We don't have to answer. We don't have to be the one, you know. And the other thing is, we don't have to ask permission. And I do want to talk about this because this is something about us having our own space. And this is very important. We do not apologize for just hanging out with Black, brown people. We don't have to apologize. We don't have to explain. If we want to hang out with our folk, we just do it. And if somebody has a problem, that's not our problem. And if you find that if you want to get together, and listen, we got to understand white privilege, got to understand it. So we got to understand that sometimes there are going to be folks who are going to feel like they have a right to enter, okay? I was in a group of, we were just hanging out, and this white person came over to us in a social event and said, "What are you doing? Planning the revolution." But see, now the Mexicans who were sitting at another table, and the people from, you know, who was it, Ireland or whatever, you know, or whatever, Italy, the Italians, see, that's okay. But when we get together, it's something about us getting together that causes white people to be uncomfortable. Well, you know what? That's not my problem. So if you find, so we got to be sometimes strategic though. Sometimes if we want to get together, you don't have to get together in the school building. That's how we did it. We had our conscious raising, our, you know, networking. We didn't do it in white spaces. We found our space and did what we needed to do, and we knew that only the certain people going to come in the door were the people we invited. So we also got to protect our spaces, okay? And one has to be strategic with that, because understand what we're in and the world that we're in, the society and white privilege and how they see us coming together. We got to understand that. And sometimes we just got to say, I'm not going to hassle with all of this. Let's meet at so-and-so's house at 6 o'clock. You know, we could kick off our shoes, put on some music, and talk trash, you know, talk some business, do some politicking, maybe read a book together, whatever. And we don't have to be concerned about what everybody else is going to say, okay? So I'm just offering that as the end. And as you go forward in what you plan, there's no apologies. No apologies. You don't have to explain yourself for why you're doing what you're doing. You know, you do what you want to do, you know, be strategic. You know, you gotta be strategic because we gotta understand the game. But I'm saying, you know, that's what we did in the 60s and 70s. We did not apologize. So I hope this helps. Be strong, be beautiful. And again, go for it. So I can sit back and say yes.